Welcome to the Endurance Podcast. In this month's episode, we talked to cycling insider, race analyst and co-host of the Lantern Rouge podcast, Benji Naesen. We chat about the ins and outs of cycling content creation and Benji's own personal cycling journey. There's some amazing insights and advice for those who are starting up or thinking about starting their own cycling journey. We hope you enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the Endurance Podcast with myself, Alex Rhodes, and Dr. Tim Podloga. Good morning, Tim. How are we doing?
Good morning. Great. It's sunny in the UK and it's been sunny for weeks now and it's great. It's amazing.
You beat me into the weather chat, but guess what? The other day, it nearly hit 30 down where I am. I mean, this was, it's sheltered from the wind, but it was so hot, and I travelled to Scotland at the weekend to race, and I don't know if you know much about the dynamics of the country, but it's never sunny in Scotland. They have like 3 days of sun a year, and I got there for 2 days of it, so it was just amazing, and it's such a beautiful place when the sun does shine, but not too often. Have you been out on the bike in it?
No, I was just basically clearing up my schedule or my diary for tomorrow so that I can go out, because the last time I was cycling outside was like last Monday and today it's Thursday, the week after. So, yeah.
You know what will happen now outside. Though, now you've planned that time out? It won't be sunny. It'll probably rain or something like that.
No, it's going to be sunny and I want to go out. I need to do my intervals outside. I just can't stand doing them indoors.
Yeah, I think so. I'm actually going over your way this weekend to another race again, and I hope it's sunny as well. I think we're due some good weather over your side of the country. In terms, talking about, I suppose, good weather. Italy has good weather. The Giro Italia has started. Have you been following it?
Nah.
Come on, Tim. We need to get you to watch some cycle racing. No, I mean, there's your fellow countryman Primoz in there. He's probably one of the favourites. Mads Pedersen's currently got the pink jersey. And there's a few others in there. Who do you think is likely to win? Who's your favourite?
Primoz. I'm wearing his watch today, so yeah, I think he's gonna win it.
Big fan. I mean, I think on paper he's the favourite, isn't he? I mean, we know a lot can happen in bike races, and whether that's technical, tactical, and different days when we get into the mountains. But I always love the Giro because it just throws up lots of unpredictability. We get into the mountains and there's all different seasons. It can be hot, it can snow, it can be rainy, and a lot can happen, can't it? So I think we're on, at the time of recording, we're at stage 6 today. So there's lots of time for things to change, but we'll see. But what I did see the other day on your Instagram account, I think it was, is you would trying some more research. So we actually spoke in the last podcast. So for the listeners, if you missed that, or you want to go check it out, we spoke about some of Tim's new research in individualizing glucose oxidation, but you are now looking at fructose. And so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, it's kind of the next step of what we've been doing in the first study, which was basically to see how people are like flexible or how different they are in oxidizing glucose so that we can personalize the intakes. So glucose obviously is the main component of all the carbohydrate products out there, and they usually come in different ratios. So Nduranz is 1 to 0.8, which is supposedly, or based on the research we have, like the best out there for majority of people on population average. But perhaps there are people that would benefit from having lower or higher fructose as compared to this 1 to 0.8 ratio. And basically the only way to do this is basically to test them. And we know like carbohydrates are super important, getting the amount right for the professional racing, but not just professional racing. Like, yeah, we have now also like amateurs doing really long events. And I think this can benefit them to basically get everything right if they wanted to. And this is something like we are currently trying to do, like the next step. Can we personalize fructose? So can we offer people the whole package and basically get them the right dose?
So really like individualizing the ratios really, and it might come away from that 1 to 0.8 that we've kind of seen as being pretty good. And
I have absolutely no clue. So I'm participant number 1. I did my first fructose trial yesterday. Now I need to send away the samples and then see what comes back. But yeah, my guess is that we would still be somewhere around like 2 to 1 to 1 to 0.8. That's just my wild guess, but we will see. Perhaps like there are some outliers, and for those we would need to cater. And outliers are like individual cases, like in professional sport, can be really important. Perhaps not on the like population average, but in elite sport that really matters, I think.
And I suppose the mechanism behind that, do we think that we oxidize glucose in the muscle, and we've got glucose and liver glycogen, and is it plausible to say that we oxidize those at different rates for each individual as well? So that is not a constant. We use a little bit of this and a little bit of that for each person, but actually someone might use loads of liver glycogen and maybe not so much muscle glycogen. And that's, might be cases where we see different utilization there.
I kind of feel that, if you ask me, like, does the training the gut work in improving oxidation rates of ingested carbohydrates? And I usually say no, there is no evidence for that. Because the gut doesn't really know, like, is it exercise? Is it not exercise when it gets the carbohydrates? So, like the glucose you eat from pasta, you get from rice on a daily basis, and all the athletes are on a high carbohydrate diet, most of them. So they're getting like on average probably 12, 13, 14 grams per kilogram of body weight of carbohydrates each day. So glucose part is always covered. So I don't think this would change massively, because you suddenly would not increase the amount that much to basically increase the number of transporters for glucose. What can actually happen is that, like in the off season, for instance, the riders or people would not be eating loads of fructose sources, because that means candy, and then it means sweets, and then means unhealthy food. So perhaps some of the athletes out there that are really obsessed with healthy products or healthy eating would have a really small proportion of fructose in their diet. And as a result of that, perhaps the transporters for fructose would not be as developed as in some others. And those riders or these athletes, let's say, would perhaps benefit more from gut training, which would also be potentially the same if they just had more Haribo in their diet, which I'm a big advocate of. But yeah, and I kind of feel like that perhaps fructose is this component that actually is variable and can vary throughout the season. So during the season, when you have a loads of training and loads of like hard races, and you really pay attention to have composite carbohydrates, so glucose and fructose, then you would get the highest ratio, so the higher proportion, and this would be close to 1 to 1, so 1 to 0.8. But perhaps at the start of the season, this ratio would actually be lower. But this is just like my wild speculation. So perhaps testing people on multiple times of the season for fructose would actually make more sense than glucose, which would be constant. But yeah, I have no idea about this.
Fascinating. Well, that's why research takes place, isn't it? Because we have a question and we want to find that out. Speaking of gut tolerance and things like that, did you see that Cameron Worth, Ironman Texas, took on like 200 grams an hour? Tolerated it, put in an amazing time. Is that pretty wild, or is there some logic to that?
Well, I would take these claims with a pinch of salt. I have not seen him, and nobody has seen him eating 200 grams an hour. Yesterday on Strava, somebody asked me how long my crank arms are on the bike, and I said 175. They're not. So, you know.
Okay. I'll leave it at that anyway. But I'm going to move on to introduce our guest because I'm super excited today. We've kind of gone a little bit different to what our previous guests have been today, but it's going to be an absolutely fascinating conversation that we're going to have. And our guest that we've got on was a race analyst and tactician consultant for World Tour teams. But most of the listeners may know him from hosting the Lantern Rouge Cycling podcast. So a real warm welcome to Benji Naesen. Good morning,
Thank you very much. Congratulations, you got the name right.
I know. Do you know? There's a little pause there, and I was like, no, I'm going to get this right.
Now, on a serious note, thank you very much for inviting me. Love meeting you two for the first time, actually, in person here. So I reckon it will be a pretty fun conversation.
And thank you for coming on. You know, you're very popular in the cycling world, and you know, it's a popular podcast that you host. So extra special to have you on. So most people will know you from the Lantern Rouge podcast. But kind of how would you describe what you do? Because you've got your own YouTube channel as well.
Oh, it's interesting because I feel like often when people introduce me, for example, when my wife introduced me to her parents, she said, he's a cycling journalist, which I don't necessarily see myself as. And some other terms that people throw at me is influencer, YouTuber, or Romain Bardet once said, that guy from Twitter. So I've had a few labels in my time, but I just see myself as a content creator. I like making content. I like making content about cycling because I feel like I've got something to say about that sport. A sport I'm super passionate about, the sport that I love watching, that I love feeling the community feeling around it. Does that make sense? Because the sport of cycling, sure, it's fun. But without the people around it, it wouldn't be as fun for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think that goes for lots of sports that we have out there. They bring a sense of social interaction and community.
Except triathlon. Nobody likes that.
Apart from people who do triathlon. But no, I totally understand that as well. And, you know, I've spent a lifetime going to various different races, and often you do come away with the memories of actually just, you know, it's not, yeah, you know, you have good and bad results and things, but it's actually the people that you interact with and, you know, the environment around that as well that creates the love for a sport and you know, things like that. But you didn't necessarily always, you know, your background's not in cycling, is it really? You started out as a developer, right?
Exactly. It's I've got a bit of an out-of-the-box story, an unusual one, I'd say, because as a kid, I played football, actually, as in European football. And at the end of the day, didn't make it as a football player, clearly. Was not talented enough. And as a kid, I was more of a gamer. I loved playing video games, and one of the games I did play was Pro Cycling Manager, which is a game that comes out every single year where you manage a cycling team and try and win races. So a bit of a fun game to play. And in addition to that, I grew up watching these YouTubers that I loved watching, playing video games that I loved playing. And I thought to myself, I want to become a YouTuber. This was 13-year-old Benji. So I'm talking 2011, 2010, something like that. So it's been a while since that moment. But around 2013, I started making these YouTube videos where it wasn't even about cycling. It was about games like Lord of the Rings, Battle for Middle-earth. A fantastic game, by the way. If you've ever played that, awesome. Minecraft, for example, but then eventually Pro Cycling Manager 2014. And I loved making those videos. Initially, they got like 10 views, so not many people loved watching them.
I was going to say, can I ask a question? Because certainly in the UK, around the noughties, you mentioned Pro Cycling Manager, but Football Manager was a game in the noughties, which was huge in the UK, and that's kind of nostalgic for my generation of people. Did you start out on that, being into football in your early days?
I definitely played Football Manager. Before that one, there was also a game called FIFA Manager made by the same people that make FIFA, but I preferred that one actually as a kid. But I just wasn't as passionate about football anymore once I left that sport. And I wanted to become a cyclist. I was like, Dad, can I become a cyclist? My dad was like, you started as a basketball player as a little kid. You weren't good enough. You went to football. You weren't good enough. I'm not going to put you in cycling. So that was the end of my cycling career. But on a serious note, it's really in 2016 that I started making YouTube videos on the channel that I have now, on the Benji Naesen YouTube channel, where it started off being pro cycling manager videos. And that was a hobby because, like you said, I was at that point studying to become an ITer, a developer. I didn't really know whether it was going to be developer or networking yet, that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it became being a developer. And in the early 2020s, during COVID, really, because COVID hit in 2020, and that really changed my life, which it's harsh to say, but it had a positive effect on my career. And that was because I had more time. I didn't have to drive to work. I could stay at home and remotely work. In doing so, Patrick, my co-host at the Lantern Rouge Cycling Podcast, known as the Lantern Rouge on YouTube, we started a podcast, Lantern Rouge Cycling Podcast. And that grew from there, while my channel grew from there. And it's been a journey ever since. And it's in 2022 that I started going full-time because it was financially viable enough to not risk my living going into it full-time. So, and I haven't looked back since. To the point that I'm actually not sure I could still develop if I tried.
And do you think like that was the point where your life kind of changed and said, you know what, this is what I want to do? Or was that gradually, progressing as you went into COVID? Or was, you just mentioned that was a significant point, but was it like, wow, I realized how much I love doing this and this is what I want to do going forwards?
I reckon it was gradually, because if you think about it, initially as a kid, I wanted to become a YouTuber, but let's be honest, a lot of people want to become YouTubers and upload YouTube videos and have people watch them. I never thought it was realistic. And it's only when 2020 hit, when we started the podcast. When we started the podcast, I felt like there was a realistic path to doing this for a living. And that's when I realized, okay, I can make this what I do for a living. And it's not because I want to get rich off of making YouTube videos about cycling. It's that I want to do something that I love doing and that I feel like I can keep doing without necessarily having to do the same thing every day. Like, the podcast changes over time. My content on YouTube changes over time. And variation is what makes me enjoy what I do, if that makes sense. And especially when people like watching it, that helps.
For sure. And more changes happened a little bit later on after that. It was kind of post-COVID series, and in 22, Jumbo-Visma reached out and you became the race analyst and tactical consultant for them. Kind of what happened there? What went through your mind as you were approached by? Was it out of the blue, or had you had conversations with them?
It was relatively out of the blue. So basically, 2022, somewhere in February, I was having a holiday with my family, which I don't often do. So I was like, okay, let's just focus on enjoying my life. And I'm walking through the forest in the Ardennes in Belgium, and I get a phone call by Marijn Zeeman. And I'm like, okay, hi, Marijn. And he basically said, we're looking for a video analyst for the team. And I wasn't so sure about it initially. And there's multiple reasons for it. Like, first of all, is Jumbo-Visma still going to be okay with me having an unfiltered opinion on the internet? Because I'm pretty brutally honest. And sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing. And I was never going to accept working for a team if they're going to tell me that I can't say something that I don't like about their team. At the end of the day, I won't trade my authenticity and my honesty with my audience for, let's be honest, I'm not going to make millions of working with a cycling team, because staff doesn't necessarily make the greatest living in the sport, I would say, from my personal experience. So for the money, I didn't have to do it. It was more, is the experience worth it? Can I do it in the first place? Because at the end of the day, I talk shit on the internet. but do I have the skills to actually apply it within a cycling team? That's also a question. I wasn't sure because I was someone that between 2020 and 2022 in the early parts of the podcast still struggled with impostor syndrome. Like, why me? Why do people care about my opinion on cycling? That was kind of the feeling I had throughout those years. And I've learned to evolve from that. And now I'm confident in what I say, that it has some type of meaning. And I feel like working for cycling teams kind of helped in that, in a way that I confirm to myself that what I say is somewhat applicable within cycling teams in certain ways. So that's one thing. But then the last question was, did I want to do it? That's also important. And reality is that for many people, working for a cycling team is a dream. I never really had that. So it was more of, will I enjoy doing this? Not necessarily my entire career, but maybe for a year, maybe for 2 years, just to see what that experience will be like. Because at the end of the day, some experience in the sport could improve what I say about the sport. If I know perfectly, okay, this is how a team plans a training camp, then I can understand why this rider is shit before his training camp, for example. That's kind of the details that you sometimes don't look at. If you're looking at, oh, why is this guy bad at the Tour of the Alps? Well, because he doesn't care about the Tour of the Alps. That's the reality. So that's a thing. And then the last question was, do I want to do it alone? And I didn't want to do it alone because I'm a bit of a risk-averse person. I'm not going to take massive risks in life. So if I can do it with someone that I am comfortable, that I can trust, that I love working with, which was Patrick from the podcasts, we ended up doing it together. He ended up staying with Jumbo-Visma longer than I did because I decided to leave after 2022. But I did enjoy working for the team throughout that year.
Yeah. And an amazing insight there as well. And, you probably get a lot of credibility for your honesty and transparency in your own thoughts as well, which has, made you successful in the way that it has. But Tim has experience of working in pro cycling here, and I'm sure those two are quite different in terms of avenues. But I'd be interested to see or understand what did that job involve. Can you go through a typical day working as an analyst? And it'd be interesting to understand how that is different to what Tim's work with a pro cycling team is like, because I think we can look from afar, like myself, and go, it'd be awesome to work for a pro cycling team. But just like in real life, we get into a job, and some of those jobs can be very different from what we perceive.
It's important to mention that it was not a full-time position. I'm talking about part-time work. I wasn't spending a full day on Jumbo-Visma. That was not what my role was. So there's no real typical day, but I can tell you how my role evolved throughout working for Jumbo-Visma, because let's say start February 2022. First projects were UAE Tour, for example, sprint analysis for Olaf Koy, as in trying to figure out what went wrong in sprints, what he did great, trying to make an easy to understand video for Olaf that he can understand what went wrong during the sprint. Because it's easy to say that went wrong, but if you show it to a rider, that's when they might really realize, okay, this is what I would need to do to avoid that next time. And an example of that is that throughout 2020, Olaf Koy's become a Grand Tour stage winning sprinter. We haven't necessarily seen it yet in this Giro. It depends on when this podcast go live, actually. But
the sprint day today.
Yeah, exactly. It's a risky thing to say. But in 2022, Olaf was not assertive enough. As in, he always got squeezed off wheels because he wasn't really protecting the position he was in towards other sprinters. In doing so, he lost positions and ended up being uncompetitive when the sprint even started. And that's something that over the years, Olaf's now great at that. He's severely changed in that. So it's wonderful to see that he's become a much better sprinter in changing his ways, getting better. Experience probably helped a lot in that, gotta be honest. But that's an example of that. And that was a start. Then it became Cobble Classics focus. And there it expanded to pre-race and post-race analysis. So not just what went wrong or what did other teams do wrong. It was also analyzing previous editions of the race, trying to predict what will happen in the race, what could be a good strategy for our team, proposing a race strategy for Jumbo-Visma for those races. I got to make it clear, I was not doing this alone. This was still with Patrick by my side, and we shared the workload throughout throughout this year. So full credit to him as well. I'm not just taking, I did all the work. That's not true. Patrick was also heavily involved in this work. And that was kind of the Cobble Classics. And that was also the first time where I was like, okay, I feel like I've maybe, even if it's 0.1%, made a little bit of a difference in, for example, when Jumbo-Visma won E3 Heidelberg that year, I was like, okay, I feel like I'm relevant in this team. I feel like I'm not just a number that is like saying, that's something that went wrong. I feel like it had consequences. And an example of like pre-race analysis is, in 2021, Quickstep was very dominant in classics. And we noticed that in the early phases of races, the way they controlled races was, okay, if X amount of riders, let's say if a group of 6 goes up the road, then one of our riders will respond to that, not by bridging to them, but by closing them gradually. And they also had a list of 3 teams that they always responded to in the same way. So they tried to prevent dangerous groups from growing and getting out of the peloton before the later phases of the race started. And that was their strategy for doing so. And that's patterns that you notice if you keep watching those classics from the past. And that was a way that we could try and outplay opponents, but also change the Jumbo-Visma strategy accordingly. And that's just one example then, for example. But I think the main focus, sorry for ranting on for a second.
No.
The main focus throughout 2022 was the Tour de France, as in trying to win the yellow jersey and the green jersey, which the team got quite a bit of criticism actually before the Tour de France for focusing on those 2 things at the same time. But I actually thought that if you have Wout van Aert, who goes in the breakaway on mountain stage to take green jersey points away, then you've also got a satellite rider up the road that can help Primoz Roglic or Jonas Vingegaard if they need to attack later, or if they're in trouble later, that domestique up the road can actually be helpful. So I actually thought going for the green jersey helped the GC leaders for the team a little bit, personally.
It was an amazing tour that year because you just had Wout on full form, and you didn't really know what was going on when it sat up over the climb, and it was orchestrated amazingly that year. But it was just from a spectator point of view, the tactics that were going on over that was just great to watch.
And the thing with tactics is, like, it's not like we made a master plan for the Col du Granon stage. That's not the reality. Yeah, afterwards in the media, it's like, the master plan of Jumbo-Visma worked. It's more that you analyze races beforehand and everything comes together in those moments. And an example is, a big question before the Tour de France was, how can we beat Tadej Pogacar? Because at that point, Jumbo-Visma internally was still scared of Tadej Pogacar, which is understandable because he was dominant before that Tour de France. Jonas Vingegaard had not won a Tour de France yet. Roglic was close once in 2020, but he had not won a Tour de France. And there was still trauma from the Planche de Belfi event in 2020, very, very noticeably within the team. So how can you beat Tadej Pogacar? Try and find weaknesses within Tadej or within the team around him. And there were a few things. You don't know 100% if something is a weakness until you get into the race and actually try to apply a strategy that could outplay that weakness. For example, we noticed the pattern that on stages with high energy expenditure, and I'll get to Tim for a second there, on stage with a high energy expenditure, ending with a 40-minute roughly climb at the end, we noticed that his power curve of Tadej wasn't looking so vibrant anymore. We noticed the potential pattern of weakness. And for example, I'm now asking you, Tim, if you look at that and you hear that, a stage with high energy expenditure with a big climb at the end and someone's power curve going down, do you immediately think, that could be a nutrition problem?
Yeah, it's definitely one of the components. Like, as a nutritionist, you always feel like it's you to be blamed for for the fatigue resistance. But it's something that, like, when I was watching this Tour de France and exactly this year, and it kind of was really evident that Pogacar was struggling with fatigue resistance. Like, whenever it was and I saw another pattern, which was basically that it was usually after an easy day that he really struggled the next day.
Yep.
And the first thing that jumps to your mind is was nutrition on point? And you don't know what people are doing. You just make assumptions. And perhaps I'm putting too much emphasis on nutrition. But yeah, this is definitely something that could be an important point.
I mean, it's that realm between is it nutrition? Is it, durability of the rider? And, it's difficult to tell. But I just have a quick question on the back of that for Tim is, Benji's talking about, strategies and things like that there. From your experience and your time working as a nutritionist with World Tour, how do you account for the variability, or that strategy? Because I understand you get the road book and you can plan per stage and things like that. Do you then go through the strategy with them and say, well, actually, this is the strategy we're going to play, and therefore we need to fuel this way accordingly? Or are the riders, self-regulating that, I know I'm going to have to start hard here, so I'm going to have to go, start taking carbs early on?
Well, this is something like I guess you get with experience. So when I started, like my first season was 2022, and like I had no idea about professional cycling. I basically had no idea about cycling in general, so I was learning. And it happened that like in that year, Jai Hindley won the Giro, and it was kind of like I always had in mind like nutrition is the most important. Last few days when we were going into the stages, I was like, I don't care really about body mass. I will just go all the carbs he can have. And we kind of ended up with crazy high amounts of carbohydrates. Obviously, like in the end, it worked out well. I'm not sure if like nutrition contributed majorly, but like it probably did because he was fine. The same strategy you apply next year, it doesn't work. But I think it's really tricky with nutrition is because always like before the stage, you want to give a prediction of the stage and like to the riders, like, fuel, I don't know, 90 or 120 grams per hour. I'm just giving out these two numbers out there. And there would be then stages when the power output on average would be like 180 watts. And then on another day, it would be 250 watts. So like a massive difference. And 180 watts, you definitely don't need 120 grams per hour. And if you actually do, then at the end of the day, you can't give this rider any dinner. So the riders that are going with 220, then the next day is like, for instance, like a hard Queen stage, like 4,000 meters of elevation gain. What do you then do on the evening? Like, do you put her either into energy surplus, give him more carbohydrates? Then sports director would be like, no, he will be heavy. But then you're like, well, he needs to fuel for the next day. So it's a lot of these kind of discussions like you have with yourself, what you're going to do. And then you make a decision, and sometimes you make a right call and sometimes you don't make a right call. And I really enjoyed like listening to the stories from James Morton when he was a nutritionist for Team Sky back in the days, and he always like was also reflecting on this kind of, sometimes they made a mistake, sometimes not, sometimes it worked out. And the more experience you have, I feel the better you get at doing this. I know AI can help, like there's some like, and you would, Benji, know more about this because you know what Jumbo was using. I kind of, for the Giro and the 2022 when I was doing most of the races, I was predicting the power by the end of the like Vuelta by plus minus 5 watts for all the riders, just by like looking at the profile and like having an idea of what might happen and knowing the riders. So I was pretty good, and I didn't want to use any kind of models, but sometimes you're still like wrong, and I think it's really important to kind of have these ideas and like this knowledge.
And I think that is the total beauty, I think, of cycling as a sport as well. And from both your perspectives there, I'm hearing about, trying to come with strategy. It's a strategy for these races, whether it's tactical or whether it's nutritional. But because of the dynamics of the race, it just takes one person to attack, and that whole strategy's changed. And it goes back to the tour, was it 22, when Wout in that year was just attacking every day. I mean, it was insane what he was doing, and it was just almost become, okay, right, Wout's just going to attack this. But if you're another team there and you have a strategy to say control it for the sprinter or whatever, and Wout's just going off the front, you're like, yeah, like we need a new strategy here and we're going full gas from the start, so we need to change our nutrition. Like, it's amazing. Like, that's the beauty of it as well.
A question for Tim, if I may ask. If you look at the sport of cycling for a second, and you see, for example, that my question is, how long does it take for, if one team innovates within the nutrition sphere, for all teams to innovate in the same way? Or is it more that a study comes out and then suddenly all teams start applying it?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Like, sports nutrition is like kind of a weird field, and like it kind of changes the perspectives. Like, just like when I started to be interested in like sports nutrition and like sports nutrition manufacturers, and this was like when I was doing my PhD. This was like 2018 to 17, in those times. And I started reading the literature, for instance, like about the perfect or the best optimal carbohydrate glucose to fructose ratio. I found out like that all the products are still wrongly formulated. Like at the time, there was like still products with just glucose only. And I was like, well, at least move to 2-to-1. And then even the evidence at the time was like, it's 1 to 0.8. It's actually better than 2-to-1. But we were like not one generation behind. We were like 2, because gels were still glucose only. Like, it was just amazing for me to see that. And I was like, why the heck nothing happens in this field? So I feel like it kind of, in the last years, that suddenly like the professional cycling teams started employing research scientists from the nutrition perspective to give them advice. And then the nutrition brands finally caught up with research, or basically they disappeared from the professional cycling, those brands that they didn't do that, that now we are a bit more up to date. But I still like kind of have this fear that there is a lot of things that we say or people might say but are actually not true, because you want to deceive others. But in general, I don't think like sports nutrition has a lot of secrets, because everything gets published eventually or very quickly. At least from my point of view, like as an academic and a nutritionist, well, I care about performance, but what I care most about is everyone knowing about what the research is about. So I will put the study out there, not thinking like I will withhold the results from everyone because I want our team to be few years ahead of everyone. I will just not risk my academic career. And I think this is how most are thinking about. But what I kind of lacked from thinking about like the development of like sports nutrition, what we have a bit of a problem in academia at the moment is that like really comprehensive studies can cost hundreds of thousands of euros or pounds or whatever currency we use. And cycling teams just don't have that money. So I don't think like they're driving the development. It's still the academia and on its own driving the biggest kind of improvements in sports nutrition, and then everything gets published. So it's not really to the cycling team that have like these major gains.
I think just to add to that, something that I've observed, and I think this is very much in elite sports domain, and please correct me if your observations are wrong, Tim, is that often the research, because you know as well as anyone that research takes time, to do a well-designed study, go through data collection, participants, all that kind of stuff. I often find that the research kind of follows what's happening in the sport in a way that this stuff, if you go with an approach that, do no harm, do good, if there's a thing where, you might change the fructose ratio, for example, it might give you a performance benefit, but we haven't published this data yet. But, we're using it. We're going to test this out because the reality is it's probably not going to make things worse. In elite sports, you kind of do find that it is starting to be used there, and then you start to see the research come out the back of that. Is that something that you see as well, Tim?
I kind of have this feeling that no, it's actually the other way around. Like I often find like innovation in looking at papers from 70s, 80s, 90s, and I find something new there, because like a theory got just forgotten over the for years, and then like suddenly, oh, perhaps we should try and out this strategy that was used like so many years ago. Like I remember James Morton at the time saying like, yeah, it's a massive amount how many carbohydrates Chris Froome had on that stage, 18 grams per kilogram. And I was like, can we go higher? Like it felt like super high to me. And then I found a paper from like 30 years ago reporting 20 grams per kilogram in a trail runner. And I was like, well, like it's actually all the evidence that actually works a lot.
But do you think, from your perspective, if you start to see something, I think this could be better, would you start to, providing it caused no detrimental effect, do you think, I think we should trial this whilst the research is being done? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it depends on what the mechanisms would be. But one of the things that kind of I'm seeing, and this is something that like I would really like to see how Benji felt like, is it because I came to cycling as an outsider, thinking out of the box, completely different perspective, and cycling is still like tradition driven, and sports directors especially. So like I think it really depends on the team how it perceives this like third opinion. And this is where innovation can happen. Like somebody completely outsider comes to the team, comes up with something new based on the sound evidence, sound like arguments, and then you can make a difference. If you're like just talking to yourself, you're like in this echo chamber and nothing in my mind can come out of it because you're just operating with the same information you've been operating for the last 10 years.
I agree. And I feel like in the realm of tactics and stuff like that, and the tactical side of the sport, I feel very similarly. A simple example is we've got a sprint stage. Let's say we have a sprinter in our team that has about 2% chance of winning, and Jasper Philipsen is at the start, or Merlier, who have about 50% chance of winning the stage. For some reason, a lot of teams that have a rider that can maybe 1 to 2% chance of win, they decide to spend their entire stage focusing on trying to win the stage with that sprinter or trying to sprint with that sprinter. While it's not really out of the box. I just don't understand why not many teams are doing it. If you go to a sprint stage like that, why not send the rider in the breakaway? In doing so, you put pressure on the teams that you're trying to beat because they'll have to control the breakaway more. And therefore, they might have a domestique left in their sprint train later in the stage. So it's like people in the sport tend to go for one strategy without necessarily hedging their bets between two strategies. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yeah, and I feel like you need to have this outside perspective, and I think like this is where like listening to these crazy ideas, or crazy ideas, whatever you call them, like can be really
even if
helpful.
It's stupid. Like if I bring up 5 stupid ideas, maybe one of the stupid ideas actually sounds reasonable.
No such thing as a stupid idea. I just want to just finish off on that side of things. Just you in 24, you went to Lotto Dstny, and we've had a lot of insight into your time at Jumbo there. But you eventually then just stepped away from working with teams as a strategist and an analyst, just to focus on your own content. Why? What was the reasoning behind that? Did you just enjoy it, or?
Well, to sketch the timeline. So I worked for a year at Jumbo-Visma. At the end of 2022, I said, I'm done with this. I would like to leave this role. And it wasn't because I hated the people I was working with. I enjoyed working within Jumbo-Visma for the goals that we set. But I like shorter term projects. I like variation in my work. So the goal for that year was, let's try to win the Tour de France. It ended up working out all right for the team, I would say, winning the yellow jersey, green jersey in a couple of stages. So that ended out quite positively. But at the end of the year, I'm not ambitious to then the next year try to win Paris-Roubaix with Wout van Aert or something. I just don't feel any ambition for that. So that's one reason. The other reason is at the end of the day, every second I spent working for a cycling team is a second I can't spend on my own content. So it's basically, it's harsh to call it that, but it's an opportunity cost is what it felt to me. Because if I can grow my own content, which is something I prefer doing, I'm more passionate about creating cycling content for a wide spectrum of people than just for 10 people within a cycling team, you know? So I was just more passionate about that. And then, yes, I went to work for 4 months for Lotto Dstny in 2024. It was planned to be a short-term project. The simple goal was try to win a classic with Arnaud Delis. It didn't help that after a single classic, he was out. So it was hard to win a classic with Arnaud Delis when he's not in the race. But I'd say the main difference between my role there and the role I had at Jumbo-Visma was I was now in contact with the team car, so I could actually have influence on the strategies at hand during the race itself, which I really enjoyed that. I also felt a bit more stressed during the race because I felt like there was a bit more responsibility there. But at the end of the day, it was fun to do that. Did I really want to do it all year? Not necessarily, because during the Tour de France, I just don't really have the time anymore to work with a cycling team. And maybe that changed in the future when I find a project I'm passionate about. Because if I'm not passionate about it, I probably won't do it because I prefer doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, for sure. Amazing. And you know, speaking of you know your own journey and your own goals there and what you're passionate about, I want to sort of take the conversation over to your own cycling story because that's unique in itself. You know, and you've been pretty open about your own personal cycling journey, you know, through your media, and what I want to ask, I mean, I suppose to start, was the main goal of, you know, getting into your own cycling journey for personal health reasons, or was there something else that drew you to it?
I'd like to start by saying that I think my journey actually might not be as unique as perceived, as in it might be unique that someone shares it like this on social media. But at the end of the day, there's so many people that started at the same spot I started that were in the same struggle that I was and still am, because I'm not done yet. I'm still not a super fit man, as you can tell. But at the end of the day, I'm much more happier than I was 3 years ago. And 3 years ago, I weighed 130 kilos, which a bit too much. I'm 192 centimeters, so I'm pretty tall, but 130 kilos is still unreasonably overweight is how I'd classify myself back in the day. And from that point, there were years before that where I tried losing weight, but I was never motivated enough, because finding motivation when you're overweight to get out there and doing sports is one thing. But I had this weird feeling maybe 5 years ago or something where I was living with my parents, etc. And it felt weird to me. It felt shameful to me to acknowledge that I had a problem. And by actually doing something about it, I would be acknowledging to the people around me that I had a problem. And that was a mind block for me for multiple years. And it took me quite a bit to get over that, to the point that doing the podcast made me much more confident in myself. And I think that helped a lot in unlocking that. And then, I don't know which year it was. I think it was 2022 roughly. I started doing more to lose weight, and the goal was indeed losing weight. I didn't really care about, can I get 50 watts more in these legs in the next year? I don't care. The goal was, can I lose kilos from the 130 that I was at the start of 2022? And that was the goal. That started by getting on Zwift in the evening, because at the end of the day, I didn't have going outside was still an obstacle to get over. Going outside, doing cycling, that was an obstacle for me at that point in my mind as someone needing to lose weight. So going on Zwift was easier, not having to put on as many clothes to jump on. Every obstacle that I took away from going on the bike and actually doing something was a positive thing for me. And 2022 was the part where, structure-wise, I'm sorry, but I was doing half-hour rides at the start, and I was completely done for after them. So that shows how far down I was. How far spiraled downwards I was. And
did you find... Oh, sorry, go on, carry on.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, did you find that, you know, having that gaming background, and having something like Zwift, which really did boom over the COVID years, do you find that just broke down some of the barriers to you, like you've just mentioned, going outside or, having to wear certain kit, that you could actually start to make inroads into, your own personal goals without some of the expectation or challenges or barriers that we have in society to go and do that?
Yes, but I think it depends on the person that you are, because at the end of the day, some people need the accountability to get something done. For me, the accountability meant that I was publicly acknowledging I had a problem, and in doing so, that scared me. So I was better off doing something by myself in the corner of my room on my little Zwift setup. Well, I literally had like cardboard boxes with my laptop on it. I swear it was like the most BTEC setup you've ever seen. But at the end of the day, it ended up working because I saw differences. And also, this is shameful to say, but I had evenings where I literally was walking around my table at 11 at night to get to 10,000 steps just to get something done that day, which it sounds weird. It sounds psychotic, but at the end of the day, it must have helped a little bit. And all those small things, that's what eventually got me to the point. Because in 2022, I was not making videos about my cycling journey, about my weight loss journey yet, because I was still not confident enough to do this journey on camera. And that really changed in 2023 then, when I uploaded my first videos of doing a starter FTP test, which at the end of the day, watts weren't very good, but it was a starting point. And I had lost the public shame around my situation, because I knew that in the year before that, I had been able to lose some weight. I had lost like 12, 15 kilos or something in that year from 2022. So I knew I could do it. And that's what allowed me to make it a public journey instead of staying in the corner of my room, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And did opening up to the public about that journey bring along, being very new to the cycling world, did it bring any difficulties along there, or was it very supportive in once you then opened it up to the world, essentially?
It's interesting because with every criticism you have on social media, 98, 99% is always very positive. Mm-hmm. The minority is usually a bit louder though. So you tend to focus on those as well. And at the start, it gets to you. It's obvious. And a simple example is I upload a video about me cycling and someone reacts to it. Mate, you're too fat to be on your bike. What do you think I'm trying to do? What do you think the problem is that I'm trying to solve? I'm trying to lose weight. That's why I'm on the bike in the first place. So initially that triggers you, but you learn to get over that. And right now, if I get a negative comment, casual Tuesday, probably every hour at this point, I get a negative comment, but that's life. That's my job. It's not my job to get negative comments, but it's a consequence of what I do. And I'm okay with it now. Because at the end of the day, I'm confident that I'm happy with what I'm doing. And sometimes a negative comment can give good feedback. Most of the time it's just actual like insults, but those we put away and we classify in, I don't care.
Yeah. And, and it's amazing. I think, thank you for sharing that. And, it's really interesting to understand that approach. And often I say is that, whether we're, I'm talking to an athlete or someone who wants to be in there, you also never know who you're inspiring. You might, sometimes we take these negative things personally, or, it's one, and like you say, there's 10 positive comments that we should focus more on. But I always say, some people are like, I want to try this race, or, I want to do that, but I'm a little bit scared about doing it, or I'm not very good at it. Or, I've had a conversation about female in cycling where it's like, I might do this, but I'm going to be last. I'm not going to do this. It's like, you never know. There might be a little girl on the side who is watching you, who you inspire for the rest of their life in doing the sport, or, being like that. So we never know who out there we are inspiring, or he's taking something for our own journey. So kudos to you for just ignoring those critics. So have your cycling goals shifted over time? Because you've been through that. Is it more about performance than health now, or have you got into the weeds of, oh, I want to increase my numbers, or I want to do this? Where has that journey taken you?
It's interesting because obviously at the start it was losing weight. I think after having lost 20 kilos and reaching the 110 kg point, I came to a moment where I was like, okay, I'm solid enough now to maybe in the lowest category on Zwift, win a Zwift race, for example, to start trying to get a certain Alpe de Zwift record, to climb my first mountain, which I did in Andorra, called Ordino, which that was something huge for me. And then going back and trying to beat that again, it started becoming about not necessarily looking at the weight, but trying to become better on the road in, let's say, early 2024, I think that ranges. But in doing so, I maybe, we'll get to nutrition in a second, maybe didn't apply, I maybe lost sight a little bit of, okay, because in the years before I was tracking calories. In 2024, I did not. And therefore, my eating behavior around the cycling might have evolved a bit negatively in 2024 to the point that I actually stagnated in 2024 in terms of weight. I got a lot better on the bike though. So I do think that I'm obviously not a body expert. Otherwise I'm not sure I would be in body science, whatever you call it, physical stuff. But at the end of the day, I do have the idea that, yeah, my body shifted a bit from having, I probably still have a high fat percentage, but muscle percentage probably went up of my body over that year because I actually got better on the bike while I was training, not consistently, but enough to actually see positive angles at the end of the year. And I have no clue where I was going with this answer, but I would say that it shifted from focusing on weight to focusing on performance to now, right now, I'm focusing on weight again. By the end of this year, I want to have lost 10 kilos compared to January. I'm on my way of doing so. And the one change that I will apply in the next coming months is that I probably will start tracking my calories again, but not religiously. I'm very aware of eating disorders in sport, and I know I don't necessarily have the affinity to get caught within an eating disorder. But that being said, I shouldn't get close enough to the line that I might end up forming one. And at the end of the day, it's a lot of people struggling with eating disorders. I also, with my content, don't want to be like, okay, we've got to track all these calories at the end of the day, because I don't want to inspire people in the wrong way either. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah, and it totally does. In terms of, I kind of think of it, and Tim might be able to elaborate a little bit more. But when we kind of look like that, and I think weight loss in cycling can be used a little bit. I don't know what the word is. It's not loosely, or it can have negative impact. It can that, we need to be super light to ride a bike well. Well, no, we don't. But there is a way to optimize our body composition for who we are, what kind of cycling we do, rather than this notion of I need to be super skinny to be a cyclist. Well, we don't do that. And it's just an interesting dynamic on how we use the language around that. And like you say, you don't want to be a negative influence, but you have your own goals around that. So yeah, it's a funny world to play around with. And I think the language is important around some of that stuff as well. But when you started, well, you've gone back from starting from a weight loss perspective through performance and back to it. How were you I'm going to go into a little bit more the nutrition side of things now, but how are you kind of fueling your rides with that in mind? Were you restricting? Were you holding back? And I'm sure Tim can jump in around the idea of, if we don't fuel on the bike, then we just sit on the couch and eat instead. and some of that underfueling can actually affect us negatively. How did you approach that in the first time you went into it?
Tim will have a heart attack here, but I'd say for the first year, I did not fuel during my rides. And partially because at the end of the day, my first year of cycling was half an hour rides in the evening. So probably wasn't too influential to get an energy gel in my mouth for a half an hour endurance ride when I was still 130 kilos. But that did evolve. As in, I'd say in 2023, I uploaded a video, for example. This was one of my earlier videos on my YouTube channel about my cycling journey, where I did a Zwift race every single day until I won a race. Spoilers, it wasn't after a couple of days. It took a while. But my problem there was I wasn't fueling properly in those rides. In doing so, I realized that I had gained weight throughout that period because I went off the bike after my race and I was like, I'm hungry. I need food. And Tim can jump in here, but that was a mistake, right?
Yeah. And it's funny because I was thinking about this yesterday. So yesterday I was doing this fructose trial in the lab, and obviously I had a lot of carbohydrates during it. So 2 hours and a half of the average power was, it was a steady state at 265 watts. So like pretty high energy expenditure. And I was like, had to eat the carbohydrates. I think it was just around 120 grams per hour in the end. But then after it, I just felt like full. Like I don't need any food now. Like I'm fine. So for the rest of the day, I was kind of thinking like I probably should eat, not because I was hungry, but just because I think I need to eat to recover for today. But then sometimes when I would do the same ride myself and I would go low in carbohydrates for the sake of like being stupid myself, because being a nutritionist doesn't mean that you practice good nutrition. And then I would be super hungry after. I would probably empty a jar of jam. And I would still not be full by the end of the day. So I think fueling during the sessions is really, really important from that perspective, to basically not feel super hungry after, and also to recover better and perform better. So
how does that how does that impact body composition from there on?
I think it's all about energy balance by the end of the day, then the end of the week, the end of the month,
But like if we don't fuel during, we then have a tendency to overconsume afterwards, and is that why it can perhaps not have the effect that we want it to if we're going long periods without eating on the bike?
Well, that's kind of the hypothesis I have. I think the main problem is basically the liver glycogen, because the liver glycogen is basically the site where you supply the glucose into the bloodstream for the brain, for all the organs, and there is only 100 grams of liver glycogen. So when you do exercise, muscles are greedy, they want glucose, they reduce the amount of glycogen in the liver. And then once you finish your session, you have low, and you don't have any carbohydrate drink, you have low muscle glycogen, you have liver glycogen that is low. Muscles will take the priority in taking up all the glucose still, and you will just need a lot of time to fill up the liver again. But if you fuel properly during the session, you might actually finish the ride with completely the same amount of liver glycogen as you started the ride. So you only need to fill up the muscle after, and your brain might still be working normally. So if you have a job to do in the afternoon, you will be able to do it. If you didn't fuel, then you will struggle.
I've got a question for Tim, if I may.
Yeah.
As someone who had weight loss as part of their journey for quite a bit and still has, if I look at a training, let's say hypothetically, I want to do a 3-hour endurance ride. That's on the table right now. And I look at the packaging of my nutrition. I'm like, okay, there's X amount of calories in my nutrition that I have right here compared to the calories that I expect to spend during this ride. As someone that's in a weight loss journey, how closely should I be looking at the calories of cycling nutrition?
I feel it's not about the calories, it's about the carbohydrate, and it's about then the power output. So for someone that does, I just taking stupid numbers like 200 watts per hour for 3 hours, you're probably like for endurance ride, and if that's low intensity, like 60 grams per hour would be just fine, or even less than that. If you're like a professional rider, then perhaps sometimes you go lower just for the sake of increasing the kind of the stress, so that to increase the adaptations. So I think it varies a lot, but I really just like to look at the actual power output and think about the demands rather than calories as such. You don't want to go too close because you still want an energy deficit. And I like to say that like you are not trying to get like all the calories on the bike that you will basically expend. You still need to basically create a deficit, because otherwise you, first of all, like you're not sparing muscle glycogen, you would just like burn these carbohydrates. So going with 120 grams for an hour-long Zwift race doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
And Benji, kind of jumping on the back of that, when you first started on that journey, were you tracking calories? Both during and outside of your bike sessions, and has that changed now? Now you just mentioned you're going back into a little bit of that. Have you changed your approach since you first started?
Well, I've definitely changed my approach, but it's more that I started counting calories, then I stopped counting calories once I had lost weight, because I was like, okay, I can count these calories in my head now, which that's a lie. I can't. But at the end of the day, I'm gonna do it again, not necessarily to restrict myself fully, but to just keep track and to see patterns on, okay, am I making mistakes here? Am I overeating in the evening? Am I doing stuff like that? So it's outside of the bike really that I would track that necessarily. And the thing is, on the bike, I'm not a nutritionist like Tim. So when I go on the bike and I look at my box of gels, I'm like, okay, how many gels do I roughly think I'm going to need today? I don't have, for example, in December, I went to Tijden, in Tenerife. I went to climb Tijden. And at the end of the day, climbing it with the body weight of someone like me, with the fitness level of someone like me, it's not a 1 hour trip up to the top of the mountain. You're 5 hours on the road. So that's a proper ride where you properly have to fuel, is what I feel like. So I made sure I didn't have in my head, okay, these professional riders in cycling races, they go way beyond these amount of grams of carbs per hour. I wasn't looking at the professionals there, but maybe Tim can jump in and give me some guidance here. But I was more looking at, okay, let's say there's about 45 grams of carbs in the shell. We've got these bars as well. I want to try and combine both a little bit. And at the end of the day, I was aiming for maybe 80 grams of carbs per hour. Was that a good aim? I'm not sure if I actually did that on the road, because on the road, I was just focused on surviving at some point. But how would you compare an amateur taking on a mountain versus a cyclist taking on an actual cycling race in terms of nutrition, if you look at the grams per hour?
Yeah, like when I race, I always go up to 90 grams per hour, for instance. And if I go for a hard ride, I would always go for like around 90 grams per hour. It's only like basically like professionals that I would go higher, but not necessarily for the performance during the ride. It's more about basically making sure that they can survive all the energy deficit that they create, because the numbers become crazy, and then otherwise after the stages sometimes you would need to fuel them constantly. But like as a really good goal for like amateurs and people that go for a hard day in the saddle, 80 to 100 grams an hour, I think that's a really, really good goal. And if they get to that, like that's basically textbook, and it's basically like has been proven to be like should be sufficient for such rides.
And for pro cyclists, training your gut is a new term. Well, it's not a new term, but it's a term that is highly thrown around within the sport of cycling. And does that also apply to an amateur cyclist like myself, that if I want to shove in 90 grams per hour, will I notice that the first few times around? Is that something that I'll get more used to along the way? Or is that person to person?
I think it's person to person. Like, for instance, I never have any issues with gut unless I'm sick, and then I would have some issues. But yeah, and some people would really struggle. And I noticed that with professional riders as well. Like, some would really need pushing with like gut training to be able to have high numbers. But yeah, it's very individual, and you need to be kind of know the person and like then recommend sometimes for like, I don't know, longer session. Let's do 2 hours with 120 and the first 2 hours at 60, to balance out so that it's not overconsumption of carbohydrates. Yeah. So then you kind of play around to get to the goal. And sometimes you would go really high for the whole session if it's really, really hard with professionals. But I wouldn't then overdo it because it just doesn't make sense. I think, if you do it regularly with enough carbohydrates, so like 40 to 80, I think that should be fine unless you're feeling bad.
I think my experience as well is that I've working with, amateur to elite is that, especially amateur is very variable. Like, I might say to someone, well, we want to try get up to like that 90, but they're like, oh, like that's going to be hard. Like, or, I might struggle to do that. But then I think a big thing that has happened over, I don't know, it's probably, longer than we perceive, is how sports nutrition has changed to help that. Back in the day, it was like, a 30 gram gel or whatever, or 25 gram gel in some places. If you want to hit 100, that's 4 gels an hour. Whereas, modern day, could be like 45, 50 grams. It's like, oh, okay, well, to meet that, I just need to, drink a bit of fluid with some carbs in and take one gel an hour. And it's like, oh, that's quite simple. It's like, I think the simplicity of it and the ease of it has got better over the years to allow people to do it. And I had that conversation recently with someone. It's like, if you try this, you have to feel, you're almost feeling like you're consuming less because you're just taking one an hour and taking some fluids on, as opposed to I'm doing it every 15 minutes for however many hours. Are there any areas, speaking of that, Benji, are there any areas that you've struggled with from a nutrition perspective? Is it the carbohydrates during the bike? Is it stuff out of there, protein intake, things like that? What do you feel is a hard part for you?
Ooh, I think I've got your notes of your questions that were sent to me before this, and there's 2 words in there called meal timing. I don't think that exists in my life. I don't think I've timed the meal perfectly ever in my life. Sometimes I eat at this hour, sometimes in 2 hours, sometimes I don't have lunch, sometimes I don't have breakfast, sometimes I realize that at 12, at midnight that I haven't had dinner. That it's probably not a good thing. The one thing that I do think I've struggled with as a consequence of that is that back in the day, I had the habit of eating very late in the evening or eating very early in the evening. And if you eat very late, then it's like, okay, in 1 hour, I'll go to bed. And if I eat very early, it meant that the hour before I was sleeping, I was snacking on something in bed. And those are 2 things that didn't seem very good for someone that's trying to lose weight. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you have any input on that, Tim?
Well, I don't know. I feel like, we have these rules. You need to have breakfast. You need to have consistent meals. But I think it's more than that. Like, when you want to try to lose weight, it's about the person and like their lifestyle and their habits. Yeah. And you want to basically accommodate that. So come closer to the client rather than like, oh, you need to have breakfast. If you're not going to have breakfast at this time, then we're not working together.
Can I sketch for a second how my life has changed over the last 3 years? Let's say 5 years ago, throughout the day, I didn't drink water. I just drank Coca-Cola from start to finish throughout the day, about 10 to 12 cans a day. Now, I maximum drink 1 can per day of Coca-Cola. And just that itself shows how my lifestyle has evolved by trying to become a little bit of a healthier person over the last 2 years. And that's a ridiculous stat to think about, because the amount of crap I drank out of Coca-Cola 4 years ago is ridiculous.
That's an amazing insight, but also, incredible that you've managed to change that as well. And, I'm sure we can all be advocates of it at certain times.
This podcast is not sponsored by Coca-Cola.
I suppose, being active around elite cycling quite a lot, and creating content, watching a lot of things. Do you feel that influences your own training, your own nutrition, and what you perceive of that?
It definitely influences my own training, and maybe in a negative way sometimes, because I make videos about my own cycling partially for a living. Mm-hmm. I post videos on YouTube where I'm cycling in. In doing so, I spend a lot of time making these videos, and that does take away from time that I would usually spend on the bike otherwise. Let's say, for example, example number one. I need to make a video where I'm doing Zwift races throughout a month. Okay, I've got a Zwift racing video coming up. I do my endurance rides throughout the week. Then I do a Zwift race at the end of the week, maybe 2 throughout the week. But then those 3 weeks of making those actual recording sessions are done, and I end up in editing mode. And the week where I edit is my worst week of cycling. It completely breaks my habit of actually being on the bike. And that's something I need to work on. The fact that my video making process negatively impacts my training is not a very good thing when I try to make videos about getting better on the bike. So that's something I need to work on. And the other factor is that at the end of the day, someone of my fitness level with my weight, I'm still 108-ish kilograms at the moment, I would say. So I'm still not a healthy weight person. And my fitness level is not through the roof either. I've won a Zwift race though, so give me some credit. But I'm nowhere near in the perfect space yet. And to look at that situation and then have to think about my content, which I love doing my content, don't get me wrong here. But okay, I can't just upload a video of 7 endurance rides. Nobody cares of me riding on my bike for 2-3 hours every day, just riding the same tempo in zone 2 or whatever, or even if it's a recovery ride. It's not very enthusiastic. It's not very explosive. It's not really I can't make a YouTube title out of, here are my 7 endurance rides. Nobody will watch. So every video needs to have something explosive at the end, which is sometimes it's climbing a mountain on Zwift. Sometimes it's climbing a mountain outside. Sometimes it's some challenge that I said. But it often means there's more intensity than I probably should be doing on the bike. And therefore, the fact that I make videos does impact that I don't do the ideal training schedule, I would say. I don't think it necessarily impacts my nutrition though, as in, when I ride my bike, I try to nutrition as well as possible. And at the end of the day, I think that's all I can do, I think.
And do you find that sometimes, in fact, I'll ask you first question. Do you plan your training out now? So now, going through getting more into that cycling, do you plan your training out as in, this is my structure for the week, or equally, does your content creation sometimes dictate that training plan?
The content creation definitely impacts my training plan. At the end of the day, in January, December even, I plan out my content for the entire year that follows. I've got a spreadsheet on Notion with every date of a video that comes out throughout the entire year, about 3 videos per week that come out on my YouTube channel. And in doing so, I've also got my cycling videos in there. Some of them are still unnamed Zwift video, unnamed outdoor video. It's just that I have a rough plan of what my schedule is going to be like. But for the next 2-3 months, I always know what I have on in terms of cycling videos. So I try to plan my training accordingly. And therefore, my content does impact my training. But also, if I have to go to Albania, for example, last week for the Giro d'Italia, not having my bike with me. So then the question is, how can I replace that? I tried to get into running recently, which I struggled with shin splints back in the day when I tried to get into running when I was still 130 kilos, which probably wasn't the wisest sport to select at start. But at the end of the day, now I'm in a better place for that. So my replacement for cycling when I go to traveling is now trying to hike, trying to run, stuff like that. I don't know if this is the right thing to do. I basically copy paste my fueling plan from cycling to my running and so forth, regardless of the fact that those sports have a different energy expenditure, I'm guessing. So a triathlete would know. I'm not going swimming. I'm not going the full way.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some different mechanical load there for sure.
Does your nutrition really change between like on the bike and running? And how do you fuel in the ocean when you're swimming? That's the real question.
You just, drink algae and seaweed and,
every fish.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I raced off-road triathlon for a lot of years, and that's a relatively short swim that you can get away with.
Oh,
you're talking between 20 to 30 minutes, depending on, margins of the course. Not like Ironman, for example. We would follow different strategies. Like you would have a gel 5 minutes before, but equally, there's not an enormous amount of time there before then we start to fuel on the bike. Now, when we go to full distance Ironman, that's different, and it may well be different as well from an amateur perspective who might be swimming like 130 versus the pros are swimming like 47, 50 minutes now, which is obscene for that 3.8k. So there's just a little bit of mitigation for that, but yeah, you can't do that.
Can I ask a question to Tim for a second? Sorry for asking some questions as well. I'm very interested in you people. So Tim, hypothetically, I wake up on my Saturday morning. I forget to eat breakfast. I've got a Zwift race planned at 11 in the morning. Is it a valuable and a valid solution to smash in an Nduranz unit energy gel 5 minutes before my race to replace my breakfast?
Yeah, I mean, I also like to explain this by like looking at the carbohydrate stores in the body, so muscle glycogen, liver glycogen. So while you're sleeping, you're hopefully inactive and you don't do anything with your muscles, so they will pretty much be as full as they were the night before. So that's fine. At breakfast, you will not really replenish that much muscle glycogen unless the previous day was a race and you didn't recover. So basically you need to take care of the liver, which is liver glycogen goes down because of the brain is still processing your thoughts during the night and needs carbohydrates. So you just basically need to sustain the amount of glucose there is in the blood, and you do that by basically having a gel just before. Okay. And I don't think the research is actually that strong to suggest that like the breakfast would actually improve performance in that context. So that sounds like a really good strategy. And I often myself wake up super early in the morning. I don't have the time for breakfast and I have intervals planned. So what I would do is, I would probably have a gel or a chew or something just before I start my ride and then fuel throughout. And I would still perform pretty well.
And I don't actually know this by heart. How long does it roughly take for that gel to kick in my Zwift race?
Good one. So first molecules would appear in the bloodstream very quickly. So even like when you have the carbohydrates in the mouth, mm-hmm. The brain will sense carbohydrates are coming. Yes. And the brain will be super excited. So you will feel the boost straight away pretty much. That's called like mouth rinsing. Carbohydrates will then slowly start to appear. But what we actually see from trials when we want to personalize the carbohydrate intake or see when the peak oxidation rates actually happen, it's actually 2.5 hours after starting the ride. So we started with 120 at the start of the session, you will only see the highest rates of oxidation at 2 hours and a half into the session.
So if it's a 45-minute Zwift race, then...
No, for 45 minutes, like based on the recommendations we have, is basically you just need mouth rinsing or like 1 gel or 45 grams. It's about just letting the brain know carbohydrates are coming. Doesn't really matter on what amount. It's just about like you feeling well.
Okay.
And it kind of goes back, as you were talking, and I was thinking that goes back to you were saying about the swim and actually having a gel prior to it. It's just an advancement of, some of that's probably going to start kicking in mid to latter way through a long swim or an early swim in a triathlon. Therefore, you can start to advance that a little bit, and then you get on the bike and you can start fueling a bit more strategically there as well. You kind of, sorry, just going back to your you plan some of that out. Alice, what are your goals on the bike now? Are you trying to improve in a certain way? You've obviously got your health and your weight that you're working on too. Is there anything that drives you slightly, like, I want to get to that number, or I want to, do Alp Zwift in a certain time?
I want to go under 100 kilos in terms of my weight. I think that's where I'll be happy with my weight completely. Like, I don't really care about getting to 80 kilograms or something. Under 100 is already 30 plus kilograms under where I started. I'm happy for life when that number's hit. And then it's going to be about sustaining that number and making the habit of cycling even more a part of my life. And just the habit of sports in general. Because I feel like in the last 2 months, really, I've gone from the habit of cycling being something I relatively consistently do in life to now feeling the necessity to, at the end of the day, I haven't gone on the bike. Let's go for a hike on this random hill in England right now. So to do something every single day, whether it's half an hour, whether it's 20 minutes, if I don't have time, if I do something, I'll be more happier in the evening. And that's the habit that I've formed now. I want to keep that going and make that more part of my life for the next year. And when it comes to the watts, I feel like my watts will always gradually get better if I lose weight, if I keep on cycling, etc. Because I'm still in the position where just riding my bike improves me. I don't need to do crazy training sessions and stuff like that to see that improvement. Just continuous endurance rides would help me in that sense. I'm still in that position. So I don't necessarily need to look at the watts as much. I do because I love data, but I shouldn't. I don't need to necessarily see that improvement there. I do think I want to get better on Alpe d'Huez a little bit. I climbed it 3 times now, I think. And the first time was about a year and a half ago, where I did it in 1 hour and 56 minutes, which that's a long time to climb Alpe d'Huez. Then about a month and a half ago, I did it 20 minutes faster on one day. And the next day I did it again. And I did it 8 minutes faster again. So now I'm at about an hour and 35 minutes as my time. And I want to get past an hour and a half, which I think I now can if I would do it tomorrow. But I'm going to wait a little bit because I want a more explosive beating my record. So in about a month or so, I'm going to go for that. I'm going to try and beat my Alpe d'Huez PR. I'm going to make a video of it, of course. And I hope to get to 1 hour 25, maybe 120, probably a bit far to reach, but just seeing the improvement itself will already make me happy. And then afterwards, I'm flying back to Andorra for the Tour de France, because that's where my podcast co-host lives, to do the podcast together. And I'll try and climb Col d'Ordino again, and I'll try to beat my previous record, which I don't remember what it was with, hopefully by 10-15 minutes. So let's hope that's the case.
We'll be keeping an eye out and cheering you on for sure. But it's
Tim's
nice.
Tim's going to be doing my nutrition. He just doesn't know it yet.
Okay, well, there we go. Gel for breakfast, 90 grams an hour on the bike, and you'll be good. You'll smash that record. But I mean, it's always nice, I think that what you've highlighted there is super important for everyone. I think is creating a habit of being active and exercising, but also having some of these small goals does motivate. Go on, sorry.
Can I be honest?
Yeah.
I feel like one thing that is severely underrated for people when they start their weight loss or cycling or any journey in sports is time. I was working full time in 2021, and I think one of the major reasons that I was able to kickstart my weight loss journey in 2022 is because I went full time with my cycling stuff. And in doing so, the time that because I was working basically 2 jobs before 2022. That turned into one job where I spent a little bit more time than on the full-time cycling, but also some of that time that I spent doing my job, I then attributed to trying to actually do the sport itself. So is it weird to say that I also feel like there might just be people that don't necessarily have the privilege of having time to spend on exercising?
Completely, and I think we could talk very in depth about socioeconomic environments, and I do think the modern working life doesn't allow for that time. There are companies that are starting to do that, but I lived South London. I live a bit further south out of London now, but you see that environment. And the hours that people work and those that have families, it's no surprise that then something that they're a little bit hesitant or I wouldn't say unwilling to do. There's willing, but it's like, I know I should do this, but having that time restriction in there as well is just going to go
like a single mother.
Yeah,
how are they going to find time to do exercise? I don't know.
Yeah, and it's so important. It's so important for us. But that's a very that's another topic that we can go down. for sure. I just want to finish up with we have a couple of questions from we had one in from our listeners, and then I just want to finish off on a question for myself. But we had a listener ask around. How does it feel? I don't know if it actually works like this for yourself, but if you have ebbs and flows in your fitness, whether that's seasonal, whether it's over the winter and you are able to get out more in the summer, how does that make you feel? And also, how long does it take you to get back into it and regain that and go, actually, no, I'm in the flow now and I'm enjoying this?
I'd say that I've got the benefit of that. I'm not a pro cyclist. Well, technically I do cycle for a living, but that's a whole different story. but I would say that I don't necessarily have an off season.
Yeah.
The off seasons I have is when I'm forced to not cycle, which in January and February I had like 3 times getting sick in a row, which that was horrible. Because after the first time you're like, okay, I'm back on the bike. A week later, in bed again for like 7 days, pure sickness. Afterwards you're like, okay, got to find a motivation again to keep starting, because after all these sicknesses, the motivation is harder to grasp. And after like 3 times getting sick within 2 months, I felt awful. And on the bike, I felt awful too. I wasn't doing very well again. And I felt that I lost quite a bit of what's in doing. So to the point that I tried doing an FTP test, which I know everybody talks about, is FTP test valuable, etc. I find it an indicator, a general indicator of my fitness, and I'm okay with that. It doesn't need to be the perfect guidance of how many watts I can do in an hour. It's just a general indicator of what my fitness is like. Is the thought process I have around that. And I tried to do an FTP test after my sickness to see where am I at after laying in bed for half a month, basically. And I couldn't even finish the FTP test. I started pacing a bit too high. I still underpaced it compared to my previous FTP test 2 months earlier. But I completely exploded in the middle of my FTP test, which my pacing plan was too hard is the consequence of that. But the reason that my pacing plan was too hard is that I took my FTP from before my sickness. I dropped it by 15 to 20 watts, and I expected to be like, okay, should be able to do this, right? Turns out I couldn't. So those 2 months really, really destroyed me. And I think I've gotten back to the fitness level I had before. Not 100% certain yet, but I reckon I should be able to do my peak numbers very soon. But so it takes a bit longer than I hoped for, because it took me about 2 months maybe to get back on track after those 2 months of sickness. But 2 months is a lot, like usually throughout the year, the chance that I'm going to be 2 months off the bike, I'd need to have an injury to have that happen to me, or sickness. And as long as I keep that in my head, that most of the year I should be on a regular schedule, then I expect growth regardless of the off chance, the exceptions, which are getting sick every now and then.
Yeah. And I think, it's not unreasonable to think around that timescale. And kind of elaborating on that question for the listeners is that, certainly in off season, it's the same thing. If we either have downtime for, off season or illness or whatever, there will be a natural decline in some fitness, but that is okay. And I think a lot of the cycling world out there, we just expect to continue to progress when actually fitness ebbs and flows. And as long as we're having this natural upward linear progression, there will be a bit of detraining and going back into training. That's important because we need to allow our body to repair, recuperate, like yourself, either from sickness or from a long season of training, to, reduce stagnation and things like that. So it's nice to hear that you think you're close back there. And it's a nice demonstration that things happen in life, but you can and will get back to where you were before or better, for sure. I have another question. What is some of the worst, because you're relatively new into the cycling training world and things like that. What is the worst bit of advice that you've been given through starting, both in nutrition and in training?
I'm going to have a really boring answer here because I don't really listen to people's advice. my whole story is trial and error. So I just try something I think is true. And then at the end of the video, I'm like, well, that didn't work. So that's kind of the vibe I go with. And I do that myself as well of the videos too. So I think I can't really think of like any worst advice necessarily. It's more when I don't listen to people's advice, that's when I do stupid stuff.
So we'll see how that goes with Tim and his nutrition advice in Andorra. Yes. And finally, if there was just one piece of advice that you could give to the listeners and someone who is starting their cycling journey, because I think that is just as, we talk about performance and we live in elite worlds of sports, but actually, the getting people into the sport and inspiring people is just as important as those who perform and who we look up to, either as kids or as spectators. But what is one piece of advice that you'd give to someone, given your experience, who might be starting their cycling journey or thinking about starting their cycling journey today?
I think there's multiple things I'd like to answer to this.
Okay.
I think the first one is, like with anything in life, just starting, regardless of how structured your plan is for training, just starting is already a major step. Even if it's doing a walk around the block, it's already a step that you hadn't made the day before. And I'm relatively good friends with this YouTuber called Matt Lane Fitness. He makes like fitness videos, etc. He's got this really nice slogan called "Better Than Yesterday." So the whole journey, I try to keep that in mind, where I don't really care about, okay, can I lose X amount of kilos by that date? Yeah, those are nice goals. Even the ones I've told you today are nice goals. But at the end of the day, my real goal is tomorrow I want to do a little bit better than I did yesterday. And that's the starting point as well. If you just start by getting out there and doing something in the first place, it's already better than yesterday. And in the long term, you will see the advantages of those decisions. And you might not in the short term, but in the long term, I promise you, you will. So in terms of fitness, that's my maybe invaluable advice, but I'm giving it anyway. On the other side, I would say maybe it applies to everything really. Don't let other people define how you feel about yourself. Because when I started my work in cycling, for example, there's so many people that are like, people in the sport, I still get side-eyed by certain staff members of teams, by certain riders when I go to a cycling race because of what I do. I won't let their feelings towards me define how I feel. I won't let the loud minority that dislikes what I do to make me feel shit about what I do. I will try to inspire myself by the people that do love what I do. And outside of that, even if you apply it outside of content creation, if you apply to a regular person doing what they do, if you're happy and you're comfortable with what you do, if you have the confidence that what you're doing is right, then at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what this random dude is telling you. It matters the most what you think about what you're doing, and only listen to that. Obviously, I'm not saying don't ever listen to feedback. I'm saying listen to constructive feedback. If it's not constructive, they can, I'm not sure if I can swear on this podcast, but they can fuck off.
Yeah, I mean, advice that is applicable in all walks of life, not just not just for cycling. And thank you for that, and thank you for sharing just all your insights, your own story. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on this podcast, and we hope that the listeners really enjoy this just as much as we have, because there's some great things to take away. There's some great motivation and great advice there as well. So we thank you for coming on the show.
I appreciate the invitation at first, but it was lovely meeting both of you as well, and getting to know a bit more about cycling nutrition from Tim, getting to know a bit more about how triathletes eat underwater algae. That's also fantastic knowledge that I will bring with myself for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I mean, anything on that is we're more than willing to share. I'm actually a cross-country mountain biker now, so I don't know where I've got this title from. But in a former life before kids, I did double my way in triathlon. But an absolute pleasure. And to all the listeners out there, we hope you enjoy. Until next time, thank you.